Good afternoon. How's it going? It is so lovely to see you all, or at least to see Jonathan and Georgia. Come on, turn your cameras on. I have to get dressed and come to the office. You could at least be dressed from like the top up, have your camera on. There we go. All righty, so we are at Thursday of week 3. We are in the middle of the Mastering the Listing Consultation scripts, which is a little bit of a lie because we're really more at the beginning, right? We just started those late last night. We're going to continue those today, including a pricing and positioning conversation that I think you will enjoy. And so before we get started, I wanted to ask a question about yesterday. Any questions, comments, concerns about anything we went through yesterday? Pre-listing packages, how those work, what they are, how you're delivering them, wow factor around those tools.
So I have a question, and excuse me for if it's a dumb question, but I'm just going to ask you anyway.
No such thing. Go ahead.
You had said the best thing that we could do is to know the market, that would be our biggest strength. So how do we do that besides looking, at HomeSnap, and what's the best way to do that?
So that's a great question. And Laura, I'm going to ask if I can defer that question to a little bit later in the evening, because as we go through the conversation about pricing and positioning, we'll cover some of that, and then I can expand upon the question at that moment in time. Would that be okay?
That's fine.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. What else? That's it? Okay. Boy, we're down to 17 tonight? Yikes. It's like half of where we were yesterday. Maybe people are late.
The weather must be nice.
Yeah.
That's why I was brave to ask the question. Fewer people.
See that? I wouldn't know about I don't know if you noticed the room that I'm in, but there is a window. It's back there, but the shade is always down, so I can keep the screen nice and crisp. So I never know what's going on outside. I get here at 7:30 in the morning, and by the time I leave, the whole day is gone. My cave. All right, so my last question before we dive back into the scripts is, it's been 24 hours since we talked about pre-listing package. Who started to build one? Who started to work on that pre-listing package? Who started to change a pre-listing package that they already had based on conversations that we had yesterday? Anybody want to talk a little bit about what you did or what you found? Any kind of success story? Any piece of brilliance?
I can be brilliant.
Well, we know that.
Trying. Actually, I just got off a call with Joe McHugh, and we kind of fell into this conversation about in a different direction, but about this pre-listing that I'm working on. And I think I'm going to use for video samples and for the print piece, I'm going to put a QR code that will go to a landing page to show videos.
Yeah, I love that idea, right? Because you're taking the offline experience online, and then you're pulling them from the online experience back to offline,
right? Because you need to do it in print, and you need to do it. I do believe it ought to be delivered via email. There's too many folks who don't want print, in my view. Depends.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is it absolutely depends. And as we talked about yesterday, if you're only doing the emailed version, you do lose some of the perceived benefit of the of the pre-listing or the pre-marketing package, right? Which is why we suggest go ahead and do the delivery, and then an hour and a half later, after you know they've received it, go ahead and send the follow-up so that you get points on both sides. Love that. Jonathan.
Just going to make a comment on the QR codes. Don't use the direct link. Use a bit.ly link. So it's a free custom link that you can then get tracking on who's clicking on. So who's scanning it. You're now going to get analytics on who's actually scanning.
Yeah,
So
and bit.ly, where do you get the bit.ly links, Jonathan?
You go to bit.ly.com.
Bitly. I'm familiar with Bitly. I didn't know that that was part of the deal.
Yeah, so it's tracking code. So now you're closing your feedback loop on whether or not that's effective or something you should be doing based on the data.
Love that. And for those of you who are wondering what language we're now speaking with the QR codes and the bit.ly and the this, that, and the other thing, just come to a technology class, right? And if we're not having a technology class specifically on QR codes pushing to landing pages where that bit.ly conversation may actually pop up, just ask the question in the next session you're in, regardless of the topic. Because if Joe's having a conversation around it or Debbie's having a conversation around it, they both use them and know exactly what Jonathan and Alex are talking about, right? And ultimately, it's just another tool to help get people from the hard copy in their hand to something awesome online, right? So that then when you pull them back to your face-to-face, because you're going to push them online, then you're going to pull them back. Right? That's kind of the whole idea of a marketing and exposure plan nowadays, right? You're going to push people online only to then pull them back, because most people don't purchase a house online, right? Except the Saudi prince that keeps texting and emailing me. He wants to buy one every fifth day. I find that him and the king of Nigeria, I think, those are the ones I get all the time, right? So just PS, in 22 years, and having been on the receiving end of phone calls, texts, emails, letters that have told me that someone wants to purchase a property sight unseen. Sometimes they mention the property, sometimes they mention the MLS number, all those things. It's never once happened. So my advice to you is, don't even bother to send it to me and ask me if it's real. Just press delete. That's not how people buy property. And I'm certain that somebody on the planet one time actually did go ahead and buy a property sight unseen by just texting or emailing the realtor and asking a question. However, I like to live in the world of probable, not just possible, right? It is possible that if I kind of push hard enough, wings might spout out of my back and I could fly home. However, it's not terribly probable, right? All righty. Anything else on pre-listing packages? All right, so we're going to press ahead. The last thing I want to say about your pre-listing package is this. If you don't have one, build one. If you have one, take a look at it and see what you could polish up to make it even more effective. And when you review what you're delivering for your pre-listing package, I want you to ask yourself this question. If I had to rate this delivery on a wow-o-meter, how much wow factor does it have on a scale of 1 to 10? And just rate it. And if you don't think you can do that objectively, give it to somebody else and say, if you received this, how would you rate the wow factor between 1 and 10? And if you're not on like a 5 or a 6 or better on the wow factor, you probably need to work a little bit more on some version of wow, right? Because you get more points. I've talked about this as easy points, right? You get more points if there's some wow factor. Nancy Manby, what you got for us?
Rick, what would you call it? I mean, we keep referring to it as the pre-listing package, but to who's the recipient, right? What would you call this? What would be the top document?
So from a client perspective, I just changed it from pre-listing package to pre-marketing package. Right, so we're going to come and have a larger conversation. So this is the pre-marketing delivery, the pre-marketing package that gets delivered. I don't know that you have to call it anything more fancy than that. I never did. Yes, sir, Mr. Z.
What do you, so I have a confession. I took a phone call while we were in the middle of talking about this yesterday. So you may have already gone over this, including the listing paperwork in the pre-listing packet.
Yeah, so it was actually the best part of yesterday's session. It's too bad you missed it.
Of course.
So yeah, we did talk about that. I advised not to include listing documentation and any disclosure documentation in that package, simply because I believe that our contracts and those documents more times than not require explanation or conversation, and you're not there to have that if you send it along ahead of time. Now, I will tell you that there was a time in my career, it was really part of my expired program, where my expired program went through a number of different iterations, and one iteration was, you know what, I heard it from somebody, and somebody said, well, why don't you just send them a contract and tell them to sign it? So we thought, all right, we'll try it. And we did that for about 6 or 8 months. Whoever we couldn't get on the telephone, our follow-up package, which was a version of our pre-listing package for expireds, our follow-up package would be delivered to their home, and it would include a listing contract already filled out. And the cover letter just said, you know, so sorry that your home didn't sell. We were concerned about getting your house on the market as quickly as possible. Enclosed, please find a listing contract to hire us as your representatives. Please return it in the enclosed envelope, and we will set up an appointment to have a further conversation. And 3 times we got a contract back in the mail. People just opened it and said, oh, look, somebody replaced my old realtor, signed it and sent it back. And we got to call and say, hey, we got you. Great job. Thanks. Now let's have a conversation around how this is all going to go down. So have I included those documents in the past? Yes. Do I recommend it now? I do not, especially not in a pre-listing package. Again, simply because there's too much in our contracts that people ask about, and there's too much conversation that should be being had regarding the disclosure forms, such that if you're not there to actually have those conversations, I think it can work against you. And if you have a different thought on that, what I would say is try it, see what happens, right? All righty. So we started our mastering the listing consultation scripts yesterday. We went through confirming the appointment, right? Any questions on confirming the appointment the night before? Who's doing that?
Somebody else, your helper.
Somebody else is 100% right? Just like the person who's delivering the pre-listing package. So just don't have it be you, right? You're focused on the other parts of the business. Have that be somebody else.
Okay, I want to ask a question. If I don't have anybody else, can I just send a text? Would that be an alternative?
Well, you do have somebody else, right? Because you have anybody in the market center to barter with. Someone's going to do it for you, and you're going to do it for somebody else, right? So I would encourage you to find somebody else in that respect. And is a confirming text the night before if you're not making the phone call, a confirming text, I guess, is better than nothing at all. And yet the confirming text doesn't accomplish the same thing as the script that we went through last night, right? It's far less powerful. It's far less impactful. It's far more difficult to send that subliminal message about the assumptive close. It doesn't really create any kind of interactive opportunity to gather information.
Mhm.
And it's coming from you. So you still put yourself in that position of having to go back and forth and answer questions and start to have the appointment the night before. So I think if you were saying to me, like, there is literally no other opportunity I have to confirm the appointment the night before, it's better than not confirming it at all. Right? Because really what you'd be able to do via text the night before is simply confirm the appointment, so that you're not wasting your time or waiting around for someone to show up. Anybody ever do that?
Yes.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, why do you have such a strong opinion about confirming the appointment the night before? And I will tell you, because in the early days of my career, I don't know if I was desperate or stubborn or both, but I would put myself in scenarios where I'd be sitting around waiting for someone to show up at a house. Now, don't forget, my early days, like the cell phone, I didn't have a cell phone. When I started in real estate, I didn't have a cell phone. I had to drive back to the office and dial it into my voicemail from my desk. Right? It was like 1943 or 44, something like that. I can't remember which.
So when you make the appointment, a question that oftentimes comes up, well, how long will the appointment take? And I usually say it's about an hour.
Yeah. So as long as you have a scripted answer for that, you'll be good. My answer was always 30 to 40 minutes longer if you have questions.
I see.
Right. Because they always have some questions. So the reality is it 45 minutes to an hour? Yes, it's typically 45 minutes to an hour, right? Because there are typically some questions. But my answer to that was 30 to 40 minutes longer if you have questions.
And a little longer if you have questions.
Yeah.
Got it.
And the other reason to have a script for that is to make sure that you're now living inside of the parameters that you just set. Right? You don't want them to arrive and then 2.5 hours later you're still yammering away about right? I told you the story that in the first probably 2 years of my career, I'm pretty certain that I took the number of listings I took because I wasn't bringing people back to the office in those days. I was going to their house for the second appointment, and it would take 2.5 to 3 hours. Those were my listing appointments. I thought that the right thing to do was to literally talk about everything I ever learned, anything I ever saw, anything I ever touched. I had this big like advertising portfolio, and I would bring them through page by page by page. It was like listing via torture. And so at some point, I think they just looked across the table at each other and said, you know what, if we say yes to you, will you leave, please? And I think they thought it was the only way to get me out of their house.
Oh, that's funny.
And well, it's funny today, I just look back at it and think to myself, I think two things. First, my goodness, how torturous must that have been for those seller clients, right? It's bad enough that they have to kind of listen to us go through the spiel 35 to 45 minutes. And if they're seeing more than one person, well, now they're hearing kind of that spiel a couple of different times.
Mhm.
It's why I encourage you to make sure that your spiel focuses on something different than your competitors, right? If your competitors are going in and having this big, huge marketing conversation, that's why I believe if you push the marketing conversation into the pre-listing package and only have to answer some questions around it instead of having a big, long conversation around it, and you focus on market conditions and the numbers, right? Because here's what I've learned over time. That's what most people want to hear from you anyway.
Mhm.
Right. I'll tell you a quick story. When we first opened the Ridgefield Market Center back in 2004, we purposely designed the larger conference room to be like our consultation room. It was our seller consultation room. And again, I had been at some conference or heard something somewhere where somebody designed their conference room to kind of be like somebody's living room. And the whole idea was to bring them in and make them feel comfortable and at home in the office so that they were more relaxed and more willing to move forward. And I thought, okay, we'll do that. And so we ordered a kind of a low conference table that was more like a coffee table. And we brought these two big cushy chairs from my living room at home, and we put them in there. And then we had chairs on the other side that were more like conference room chairs. And that's how and the screen behind us, we had the big screen behind us so that the people sitting in the cushy chairs could look at the screen behind us. And that's how we did our consults. And we had this guy there one time. He was there by himself, and we were having this conversation. And our dog and pony show at the time was we would start with a conversation about all of our wonderful marketing and exposure skills and all the brilliant results of that. And then we would pivot to market conditions and numbers. And this guy was in this chair, this big, great, comfy chair that one of the things we found over time was that sometimes people got so comfortable in there. I'm sorry, what? I'm like nodding off because they were so comfortable. He was like rooching himself around and couldn't get comfortable, and he's moving and it got to the point where I thought to myself, you know what, we kind of can't let this go anymore. There's something clearly wrong. And so Debbie was the one talking at the time, and I kind of put my hand over on top of her leg to kind of say, well, let's take a break a minute. And I looked at the guy and said, you know, Mr. Seller, I cannot help but notice, I'm sorry to interrupt, Debbie, but I cannot help but notice, Mr. Seller, that you look terribly uncomfortable. Is there anything we can do to create some more comfort for you? And he said, oh, thank God you stopped. Guys, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you knew how to sell my house. Can we just fast forward to the numbers? I'm going to tell you what, that guy and that phrase forever sticks in my head. Like, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you knew how to get the job done. Why are you selling me on something that I'm already sold on? In the very first, maybe it was the second season of The Apprentice. Do you remember Donald Trump's show, The Apprentice, back 100 years ago? Right, in one of the very first seasons, he takes the groups down to Atlantic City, and I don't know if he still has casinos there, but he had those two casinos down there, and one group was in one casino, one group was in the other casino, and the whole idea of the challenge that he gave them was they had to find ways to sell raffle tickets, expensive raffle tickets, for this car that was parked in the lobby of each of these casinos. And the one group, I'll never forget this one group, some like child singer, I don't think it was Justin Bieber, but it was somebody like that, right, was performing at one of the casinos. And so the group in that casino thought, hey, you know what? One of the best ways we know how to sell tickets to a raffle for a car is to have somebody famous stand there and hawk the raffle tickets. And so they set up a meeting with this kid. I don't know, he was a teenager probably at the time, and the management for this kid, and they filmed it. And of course, it was for a television show, so the kid was actually in the room. In real life, he would have sent his manager, but in this scenario, because it was going to be on TV, the kid was there. And so the team leader describes what they want done and what they want him to do and why. And the kid thinks about it, looks at his manager and says, yeah, I'll do it.
I remember that.
And the team keeps selling. And the kid looks at his manager again and says, yeah, no, I got it the first time. I think that'll be fine. I'm happy to do it. And they kept convincing him as to why it was such a good idea. Well, by the third time, this teenager looks at his manager and looks across the room at this group and says, okay, guys, look, I'm not sure how many other ways you want me to say yes, but take a word of advice. When you get the yes, stop selling, move on. Right? That too has always stuck in my brain. And it's kind of that same concept. If we think we have to tell everyone every single thing we know, instead of asking them what they'd like to hear, we may be talking ourselves out of business. And so after we had that experience with the guy who was reaching around on his seat, we literally the next day pivoted to asking our client the question, hey, it's so great to see you. I'm curious, would you like to start with a conversation about marketing and exposure, or the numbers, the market conditions and numbers as they affect your property? And 9.5 times out of 10, people would always choose the numbers. And then probably 6 or 8 months after we started asking that question, once we got the feedback and recognized that everybody wanted to talk about the numbers, we just stopped asking the question. And that's when we moved more of our marketing into that pre-listing package, so that it was being delivered and being reviewed beforehand, so that we could dive right into the data and how the data affected them in their home, and then answer questions on the tail end if necessary. Which brought listing consultations from forever down to 30 to 40 minutes longer if you have questions. That's kind of how we got here.
So the old model that I've seen so many times is first you tell everything about the company and how great you are and everything to the detail. And while the people's eyes are glazing over, they can't wait to the finale when you finally disclose the numbers. You're saying that let's get to the numbers first and then talk about the rest?
Well, here's what's fascinating. If you just move to the numbers first, you don't usually have to talk about the rest.
I know. That's exactly right. Then you can just talk about the numbers, which is really what it's all about.
Yeah,
And
exactly
the
right.
rest is really just decor, I think.
And certainly you heard me say last night that that whole idea of like going on and on about the company that you are affiliated with. Oh my goodness, like who could care? The answer is absolutely nobody. So please don't trip and fall into that trap. And if you come from an organization that really pushed and promoted that, I'm going to ask you to take a step back from it and trust that the reason that the seller is in front of you is because they're interested in hiring you. They're not interested in hiring Keller Williams. They're interested in what you have to offer. So talk with them about what you have to offer. Talk with them about the things that you just spent time learning about the market and how the market is what's driving the market right now, how it affects their home. Those are the things that make the difference, right? Brand is not unimportant. The question is, whose brand do you make important? And what sellers are interested in is hearing about you and your brand. Your company affiliation is a kind of a semicolon at the end of a sentence, just to kind of bridge you to getting someplace next. Make sense? All right, so let's dive back into the scripts, mastering the listing consultation scripts, because we got through setting the appointment. We're going to start tonight with setting the stage. And setting the stage is ultimately the script that you use either when you walk into the conference room and they've already been seated in the conference room, just kind of the hello script to get the whole thing started, or if you're walking them from the lobby to the conference room, right, you can start using that script as well. Now, one of the things that I was never very good at was small talk. And so what you'll find is that these scripts have script work from kind of the very start. It's not like we do a bunch of small talk and then dive into the scripts. The scripts you have in front of you are from when we meet to the end, right? The consultation is a script. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but small talk makes me a little anxious. So therefore, I would just make sure that the conversation was always the same. And for me, it wasn't how's the weather. It was, you'll see it right in the script there. Right? Did you find us okay? That's always my icebreaker. Did you find us okay? Right, so let's do this. Would it be all right if I played the agent and just kind of read through this script with you, and then we'll go back and dissect it? Okay. So setting the stage, and I'm just, and instead of having somebody kind of read or make up the lines of the seller, I'm just going to read through the script. I want you to hear how this kind of flows. Hey, how are you? Great. So did you find us okay? Excellent. And now we've seated ourselves, or I've sat down and put my stuff on the table. Right. So listen, Nancy, before we get started, can I get you anything to drink, some coffee or some water? And then clearly, if Nancy wants coffee or water, get it. And if she says no thanks, or I have my own, right? Here's the one tidbit I will give to you. If you offer coffee or water, please make sure you have it to give. Again, I've made that mistake. Hey, can I get you something to drink? Sure, what do you have? Well, what would you like? I don't know, do you have a Diet Pepsi? No. Oh, okay, well, do you have Diet Coke? No, I don't have that either. Oh, well, how about some tea? I don't think we have that either. Right. So, right. So what I should have said is, can I get you some water? Because that's what I had. So just make sure that if you're offering something, you actually have it. I would tell you at some point, Debbie and I got a refrigerator that we hid downstairs at Century 21 and just kind of stocked it with our own stuff, because we kept offering things to people, and then sometimes people would say yes. All right, so Nancy, we have a lot of exciting things to discuss today. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to jump right in and get started. Would that be all right? Great. So Nancy, I have a great deal of respect for the investment of your time. In fact, we have only 3 goals for this evening. Number 1, we're going to review your motivation to sell this house now and agree on a price that will cause it to sell. Number 2, we'll take a moment and I'll answer any questions that you may have. And number 3, we'll decide tonight whether or not you want to hire me. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Excellent. So Nancy, I have 3 critical questions for you. Number 1, do you really want to sell your house?
Yes, of course. I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to.
Brilliant. Number 2, are you willing to price your house to sell, or do you want it to sit on the market month after month after month?
Well, I want to get the most I can for my home.
Understood, understood. And number 3, do you want me to handle the sale for you?
I don't know yet. That's what I'm here for. I'm comparing.
Excellent. Great. And we move forward. Right, there is the setting the stage script. Very short, very simple. It takes about 3 minutes to deliver, right? Including having the seller answer. Let's go through it. I want to just spend a little time breaking it into the 3 sections that it actually that are important to note, and give you some background on that on each section. So that first third is really just kind of the get to know you. It's get to know you and let's get launched. One of the things that I oftentimes get asked is, well, where's all that stuff about, like, where's all the building rapport portion? Like when we talk about, their vacation, or how nice the shoes are, or, how the kids are and all that kind of stuff. Right? And it's a great question. And my answer to that is, I want you to start focusing less on personal rapport and more on building business rapport. Right? Even if you're listing a friend's house, when the friend leaves their kids at home with a babysitter and comes to the office to sit and have a conversation with you, that's not the time to discuss plans for the weekend. It's not the time to discuss the latest Netflix movie you watched last night. Right? Which is why these scripts move us very swiftly into, let's get down to business. I can guarantee you that 95% of the people who take time to come to your office to sit and have a conversation with you have an expectation that they're going to arrive and have a business conversation. some of you go overboard with the whole let's talk and talk and talk personally thing. And what you don't recognize is that the people sitting across from you are sitting tapping their fingers thinking, okay, really? This is why I left my kids at home. I'm paying 20 bucks an hour to have to listen to a review of whatever, right? Do you see that? Now, again, that doesn't mean don't be personal or personable. It means move swiftly into you. Once you finish the consult, if you want to have personal time and catch up and plan the weekend or do whatever, do it after the fact. Don't do it before the fact. Get down to business quickly. As you can see, we have a great deal of respect for the investment of your time, and we're gonna get started, right? We're gonna jump right in. We're gonna get started. Now, if you notice, it talks about jumping right in, and then you ask permission about that. If it's okay with you, I'd like to jump right in and get started. Would that be okay? Maybe the potential seller says, well, certainly, but before we do, I wondered if you could, if we could talk a little bit about X, Y, or Z. Well, then again, like a human, then you would say, oh, certainly, let's have that brief conversation and then direct them back. But 9.5 times out of 10, what's going to happen is you're going to ask that question and they're going to say, yeah, that's awesome, because that's what they want. They want to move that through as quickly as possible. So the scripts were sent via email. If anybody has that PDF downloaded and can post it in the chat for anybody who doesn't have them, that would be awesome. Give that just a second, Laura. They may show up in the chat.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And if they don't show up in the chat, I would just give a call to either front desk. The offices are still open for another 20 minutes. Give a call to either front desk and ask whoever answers it to re-forward that to you. All right, so that's that first third. The second third moves into that 1, 2, 3 spot, right? The questions, which are actually goals, right? They're outlined. It's an outline of goals. So what we're doing in this middle section is we're just outlining the agenda. This is the agenda section of the setting the stage. Right? The agenda for the evening is we're going to review your motivation to sell the house and agree on a price that will cause it to sell. Please note that those words are chosen very specifically. We're going to review your motivation to sell this house now. The now is there for a reason, right? We're not selling the house later, we're selling the house now because we're looking to continue to create urgency and agree on a price that will cause it to sell. Don't leave out that last piece. I find that people say we're here to review your motivation to sell this house now and agree on a price. Well, that's not really the intent. The intent is to agree on a price that will cause the sale of the house, right? So don't cut that short. The agenda goes on to say we'll take a moment to answer any questions you may have. How long are we going to take?
Take about 40 minutes to an hour, unless you have questions. It will take a little longer.
Yes, and that's an awesome script when they ask how long the consult is going to take. However, the question right now was, how much time are we going to take to answer questions based on this script?
A moment.
We're going to take a moment, right? And again, guys, this is written very specifically. You want to seed the conversation such that the question and answer period is actually just a small moment. Now, if they have tons of questions, you're not going to say, oh, I am so sorry, your time is up. That moment was all we had, right? Sorry, make the questions quick because that moment goes by swiftly. You're going to take their questions and answer them. But again, this is a setting the stage opportunity. This is a planting seeds opportunity. And so the seed that you're planting from the agenda perspective is we're just going to take a moment to answer any questions that you may have. The seed that plants is, I likely won't have many questions by the time we get finished with this. And so if you start communicating that up front, guess what happens? They have fewer and fewer questions because you set the expectation that through this process, I'm going to answer most, if not all, of your questions. Do you see the psychology behind some of this? It's why I stop a little bit and go through some of this kind of in detail, because I want you to understand what it is you're actually saying and why. There's a reason these things work the way they do. And then the last piece there, number 3 for our goals, is the most important part of the setting the stage conversation, and it's the most important part of the agenda. We'll decide tonight whether you want to hire me. Here's what I've learned. If you don't set the stage that this is a hiring consult, that the reason we're here tonight is to decide whether or not you want to hire me, they don't think that they have to have an answer by the time you're done, which is why you get the, we want to think about it, or we'll think it over and let you know. And worse, you haven't convinced yourself that you are owed an answer by the end of this consult, because you haven't set the stage, you haven't set the expectation that this is a hiring consultation conversation. So when you say it, they then know it, you then know it, and because you set it as part of the agenda, guess what? It's weird then if you don't close and ask for the business at the end. And that's what a lot of you struggle with. Right? We're moving back into, we haven't done them for a while. I'm excited to get back to them because they do require us being more in person, right? And as the offices open more and more freely over the course of the next few weeks and months, we're going to get back to in-person listing rehearsals. And those listing rehearsals are you sitting and just doing your listing consultation. I play the seller, and we usually have 5 to 10 people in the room just kind of watching, taking notes so that you get feedback, not just from me as your seller, but from your peers about the things you did awesome and the opportunities that you might have for improvement. It is way fun. It might sound terrifying to some of you, but it's actually a ton of fun. And why am I talking about that? Oh, and so one of the last times I did that, I got through a person was really actually quite good, right? Really spot on, moving through the scripts, asking all the right questions, recognizing where they needed to pause and do their thing and whatnot. Got all the way to the end, to the point that the seller, me, agreed on a price that made sense. And then there was this big, long pause. That's painful, isn't it? And that was this big, long pause. And it was long enough, and I just sat there silently as the seller, that the agent finally had to break the silence, except instead of closing and saying, you know, if there's nothing else, I have the contract right here, let's get that signed. He decided that he needed to go back and talk about marketing, and literally went backwards in time and started talking about something that he had already talked about. Right? And so I let that go on for 5 or 6 minutes, and then I just kind of stopped the whole role play and said, okay, let's break that down, right? You need to understand and learn those closes. We'll get them to you on Tuesday so that you have them in front of you. But you need to learn those you need to learn 5 or 6 actually clear, concise closes, so that when something happens, like when there's a break, when there's a moment of silence, silence is the key. Silence is the clue to just go ahead and close. Make sense? Yes, sir, Jonathan.
Wouldn't you want to ask whether or not they're going to want to hire you? Like, some of these questions just seem like you would do that through your qualifying phone call prior to a meeting.
Well, you might, and we that was part of what we skipped to get here faster, right? We skipped the pre-qualification document. I will have that for you on Tuesday. I purposely skipped that And I also purposely skipped the walkthrough conversation so we could get into these scripts a little bit faster. Some of them are on that pre-qual document. However, there are some that are worth repeating, right? Like being in person and making sure they understand that the reason we're sitting across from each other tonight is for you to decide whether or not you're going to hire me. You may have already asked that question to get the appointment or to confirm the appointment, but you want to restate that when you're face to face. Yes, Don.
Another reason why you want to ask them again when you're sitting there is the first time you may have just been speaking to one of the people if it's a couple. Also, sometimes things change. You're just reconfirming.
Yeah, good points. Then that last piece, it's motivation, motivation, close, right? So 3 critical questions for you. Do you really want to sell your house? That just gauges motivation all over again. Are you willing to price your house to sell, or do you want it to sit on the market? Now, I added, my version of that was today it might be week after week after week, right? Because month after month after month might be a real stretch. Yet in a more normalized market, my version of that was, or do you want it to sit on the market month after month after month? Notice it's an either or question. Nancy chose not to answer it, which is typical, right? Again, that's how sellers behave. And so Nancy's answer was, well, I really want the most for my money. Well, that wasn't really the question. And yet you can count on that answer being 85% of the time, right? Because the question feels like a trap to the seller, right? Do you want to price it to sell, or do you want it to sit? Well, they clearly don't want it to sit, but they don't want to necessarily commit up front to doing the thing that they might not want to do later, right? So it feels sometimes like a trap. And so they play the middle of the road. That's okay. Did you notice though, when Nancy said it, I didn't challenge it. I didn't ask her to get more specific. I didn't say, well, you know, it really is going to depend on the market. I mean, because these questions down here, that's not your opportunity for an editorial. They're setting the stage questions. They're designed for Nancy to give an answer. They're designed to test the waters, right? How many of you play poker? Why do you bet in poker? Anybody know why you bet in poker? Go ahead, Ralph.
Win?
To win? Well, yes, but what would actually make you win? What are you trying to ascertain when you make a bet? Go ahead, Chris.
You have a good hand.
Well, I bet to build the pot because I think I'm going to win more in the end.
All right. Well, it
You're
sounds like,
gauging the
poker, by
other
the way.
players. You're gauging the other players.
say it again, Jonathan.
You're gauging the other players.
Okay, so I now figured out who I do want to play with and who I don't want to play with. Ralph and Chris, you're invited to my next poker round. Jonathan, maybe not, right? Because that what Jonathan said is 100% correct, right? You bet in poker to figure out what everybody else has. If you're betting on your hand, you may not last very long, right? It's about your hand, of course, but the reason you place bets is to see how your hand holds up against everybody else's, right? This is it's the same idea at the bottom of this page with these 3 critical questions. You're just making bets to see where the seller's at. Do you want to sell your house? Are you willing to price it well? Do you want it to sit? All those different things. And then the best bet is right at the end here. Do you want me to handle the sale for you? It's just a close. And the way Nancy answered it is, again, how 85% of sellers will answer that. You know what? Great question. I'm not sure. Actually, that number is a little bit high. It's really more like 70% of sellers. Because I will tell you that I have run the statistics personally on this, and I found that in my business, 3 out of 10 times when I asked that question, at that moment, which is less than 5 minutes after we've sat down to have a conversation, 3 out of 10 times, the answer was yes. So guess what? When the answer was yes right up front, said awesome. And I pivoted to the contract and we signed a listing contract. We didn't fill in the price. We signed everything. And then after we signed the listing contract and I was hired in partnership, we then went through the numbers and determined a price. If you could, if 3 out of every 10 of your listing consults were shortened in that respect by simply asking that question within the first 5 minutes, why on earth wouldn't you do it? Right? I don't know, it got a little quiet. It means either you're thinking, you've gone internal, or you're saying this guy's a whack job, he's lying to us. I promised you week 1, I'd only tell you the truth. Anybody else ask that question right up front? Do you want me to handle the sale for you? What have been your experiences, those of you who have done it?
No, I'm afraid they say no, and then the whole thing is kaput.
Mm.
Then I feel like, oh my God, I'd rather keep it to the end. I feel like I need to perform and show them what I know. And sometimes it drags on and it's not efficient. I'd like to do it differently. I don't want them to glaze over, and get annoyed while I'm talking.
Yeah, no, agreed. And would you agree that then asking this question right up front, risking, here's the thing. I think one time in my entire career, someone actually said no to that. They either said yes, or the Nancy answer gave. The answer Nancy gave, which is, you know what, not sure. I mean, so far so good. Let's see how this goes. One time somebody said no. And I have to tell you, I was not prepared for it. Like, wait, what? Like, can you explain that? What does that mean? Like, what are we here? What are we doing here together then? What else, Donna?
Yeah, so I ask it all the time. I mean, I ask it as soon as I walk through the door. I'm like, so are we ready to get things started? You ready to sign the contract? I mean, why not? I'm closing all the way through in many different ways. And here's the thing. Often they say yes. Often they say yes. Not just sometimes, often they say yes.
Yep.
And then you can cut right to the chase, get things signed, pull out that listing, get it signed, then we talk about everything else.
Well, I also feel that once they've said yes once, it's harder for them to change course and say no.
Well, which is part of why this is such a brilliant question to ask right up front, right?
Yeah.
Let's just get the yes.
Because then it's a different meeting.
Completely.
We're doing something different than what we had planned, and it's okay. I don't mind pivoting and moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, always be prepared to just take the listing, right? Remember, when they say yes, stop selling. The advice of Justin Bieber or whoever that was, I'm pretty certain it wasn't Justin Bieber, but in my story, it always ends up being Justin Bieber. Good old Justin. Thanks, Justin. If you note at the very bottom of this page, it says the seller's answers to these questions are not really relevant. Listen, validate, and move forward. Listen, validate, and move forward. Right? Don't stop and start having conversations around this. This is not where you start to have a conversation around overpricing or underpricing. I need the most for my house because I'm moving and I have to use every dime I make here to buy something great down in Georgia, whatever. Right? That's not the place for this conversation. You're just asking simple questions to gauge where you stand and then move on. It's the bet in poker. So raise your right hand and say, I, repeat your name, do solemnly swear that moving forward, I will actually ask for the sale, ask for the business within the first 5 minutes. Because that's what this calls us to do. and it works. Here's the one last thing I want to say about that. If you struggle with that concept and you're afraid to actually ask the question up front and early on, I want you to really sit back and consider what's driving that. Is it a mindset of scarcity versus a mindset of abundance? And what the difference there, of course, is in a mindset of scarcity, if for some reason they should say no, well, this is my only path to any kind of business, so therefore I won't be able to pay my mortgage in 2 months. Is that the kind of thought process you have about asking that question? Or do you come at it from a mindset of abundance that says, what's the worst that could possibly happen? They say, no, you're only here because I needed to get somebody else's opinion. I'm actually listing it with my neighbor. You probably know her. Her name is Maria Jones. And you say, got it. You know what? Thank you so much for your honesty. I appreciate that. What I hope to be able to do tonight is indeed give you the second opinion that you're looking for. But you know what? I would encourage you, keep an open mind, because you may be so wowed with what we have to talk about in the next 20 or 30 minutes that we may have to give Maria a call and tell her there's a change of plans. That's my goal for us tonight. You ready to get started? Great, let's go. Right? You just pivot through it. You don't get all freaked out and say, oh, Maria has it? Okay, well, you know what? Here's my report. You can just read it. I'm going to go and run out the front door. Right? But I want you to think about what I just said, because some of you mentally may perform that way. You may not physically get up and run out the front door, but you mentally may decide that this meeting is no longer worth it because they already said they're listing with Maria Jones. The way I view that is, aha, gauntlet thrown down, challenge accepted. It's Maria I'm competing against tonight. Let's do this. Let's get ready to rumble, right? It's about mindset. It's about mindset. Scarcity versus abundance is a really, really big deal. And it will determine how you show up and your ability to pivot in these situations. So just go ahead and try it. If you're not lead generating like a business owner, you may also struggle asking that question right up front. If you're lead generating effectively, like a business owner, what you know is worst case scenario, this one doesn't work out, well, then you're just on to your next one, right? All righty. Any questions on setting the stage? It's a really good script, trust it.
I did
Yes,
have
Chris.
a question, I'm sorry. Did you leave out deliberately, in number 3, there also may be some times when you want to set a price that will not cause your home to sell, et cetera?
So yeah, great question, Alex. And so there is a small piece in that paragraph that is not part of the normal script. It's there because you kind of have to watch for it. It's a bit of an acting moment, right? Because some people are a little bit shocked that you say, we'll decide tonight whether you want to hire me. And so if in fact there's some sort of either verbal or nonverbal look of shock or surprise, you have that script to go to. You know what, you seem perplexed by that question. Allow me to explain, if I may. There may be certain times when you want to set a price that will not cause your home to sell, or you may request that I pay for certain marketing or exposure that experience tells me will not attract qualified buyers. In those rare circumstances, I may decide that we're not the best match and we'll choose to kind of turn you down now rather than let you down later. Does that make sense? Do you see how you might use that? Right? It's only there for the what if, which is why I skip it normally. Chris, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to add on to the scarcity versus abundance, concept you were just talking about, that the size, you're right, the size of your pipeline going into any appointment, it solves a ton of insecurities in yourself and in your business. Like, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Debbie, would you do me a favor? Noah needs his vaccination card and it's sitting here in my office. Can I give it to you to bring downstairs to give to him? Guys, I apologize. I'm sorry. My poor son is going to get his second shot and he needs his vaccination card and I have it. So he's texting and calling and all kind of freaked out about that. So do this. If you can bring me that blue bag. If you turn the page to the next piece of the script, fiduciary versus functionary. Fiduciary versus functionary. We're not going to go through this specifically together. But what I do want you to do is read through that. Maybe it's not here. Guys, I'm gonna beg off for just 90 seconds. I'm gonna put myself on mute. I apologize. Give me half a second. Okay, my apologies. Crisis averted. So fiduciary versus functionary is a part of the script that I will tell you that most people don't necessarily memorize these two big long paragraphs. Instead, what they do is they memorize the concepts on these paragraphs. Some people kind of bullet point them if they're using a PowerPoint or whatnot. P.S. I don't necessarily encourage a PowerPoint for your listing consultation. However, if you have one, just make sure it's short, because death by PowerPoint is one of the worst deaths that you can possibly imagine, right? And so when I always know when I'm in trouble when I'm meeting with somebody, or even like in the Zoom world, and they put their deck up. Whenever they call it a deck, I know we're in trouble. Like, oh man. And at the bottom in the right-hand corner, it says 1 of 79. And you think, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I'm going to grow old sitting in this chair. So make sure that you're always modeling behavior for your potential clients, right? And so be careful that the behavior you're modeling is not one of, oh my goodness, this guy's going to drone on and on and on and on and on. Because if that's the behavior that you model in the consultation, the seller is now thinking, okay, well, what's going to happen when I have to call him and just ask a quick question? Is he going to drone on and on? Is this how it's going to be throughout you're always modeling behavior. So if you use a PowerPoint, keep it short. I mean, when I say short, I mean like 5 to 8 slides short. It really shouldn't be much more than that if you're using one. And one of them could be, if you're using a PowerPoint, as a supplement to the conversation, you could bullet point some of these items in fiduciary versus functionary. It's a really important concept to understand, right? The idea of a functionary or an agent, someone who just kind of goes through the motions, versus a fiduciary who is that advisor, that coach, that educator, right? Someone who is in a special relationship of trust with you, who has responsibility to you, who keeps your confidences, who asks questions, listens to the answers, works based on your wants and needs, not their own. Versus someone who is the exact opposite of that, right? And so the whole idea of having a conversation around whether it's a shortened version or an elongated version, the whole idea of fiduciary versus functionary is to set yourself apart, is to make sure people understand that you run your business as a fiduciary. Because here's what I can tell you. I know for certain that we took listings because we used the word fiduciary and our competitors did not. Anyone who understands what that word means wants that. And so when you use it and then talk about the fact that you are a fiduciary once hired, that you behave in a fiduciary manner, that's important to some people. And it will win you the day in many scenarios. Debbie, am I lying about that? I only see you nodding your head. Does that mean I am lying about it?
No,
Oh.
I was shaking my head. It is 100% true. And I will say that one of, certainly as the seller's representative, you are a fiduciary. I will say that in talking with attorneys, especially, they get it. I will always say, fiduciary, are you familiar with that term? And then have a little conversation around it. And I remember one time saying it to a buyer who was an attorney, and he said, do you act as my fiduciary? And I said, do you want me to act as your fiduciary? And he said, absolutely. And it was an easy get the buyer agency thing, ERR signed like that. They want that kind of representation. They want to know that you're on their side. They want to know that you can do things for them to make the process simple.
And so when we keep throwing around that word fiduciary, I want to make sure that everyone is clear about what we're talking about, right? There are 6 fiduciary responsibilities that you learned way back in Principles and Practices. For some of you, that was last week. For some of you, that was longer ago. And so the idea of reminding everyone about those fiduciary responsibilities, what are they? Do you remember? Do you remember old car? Or some of you learned it as cold AC, right? So it's obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care. Those are the 6 fiduciary responsibilities. I learned old car. So for those of you who learned cold AC, I just gave them to you out of order. That's the order I know them, right? And so be clear about what that is. Be clear about what that answer, could you answer the question if someone said, well, you know what, it sounds interesting. Can you tell me what is a fiduciary? I don't understand how do you behave differently? Make sure that you can answer that question. A fiduciary is someone who, the simplest explanation is someone who puts your needs and interests above their own every step of the way. Some examples of fiduciary responsibilities that I have to you once we're in business together are things like obedience and loyalty and disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care. Right? You can turn that definition into a script that helps wrap the potential client in some bubble wrap, saying, you know what? I kind of like the way that sounds. Wait, versus someone who doesn't keep my confidences, who makes decisions based on their own needs or desires, Someone who doesn't necessarily have my best interests front and center? Yeah, that's the opposite. That's the functionary side of this. You hearing it? You getting it? All right, turn the page. You're going to learn two needs analyses with me. The first is the needs analysis on the seller side, and the second next week is going to be the needs analysis on the buyer side. The needs analysis on the buyer side is longer and done for a slightly different reason. The needs analysis on the seller side may yet again, who asked this question before? I can't remember. I think it was Jonathan. The needs analysis on the seller side may sound like a rehash of some of the things that you asked in your qualification conversation. And it's done for yet another reason, right? The whole idea of the needs analysis on the listing side is for you to cheat. It's for you to ask some questions and hear what's in the head of the seller. And for the most part, what you're asking is, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, who do you need me to be so that in about 15 minutes, when I ask you for the listing, you say yes? Who do you need me to be? And oh, by the way, once you say yes and I say yes, then I'll just know who to be. Right? I'll know what's important to you. I'll know exactly the things that I need to address for you and with you as your partner in this venture. Would it be helpful if we just kind of demonstrated it real quick? It's not a lengthy process. So let's do that. Donna, would you be my seller?
Yes, sir.
That would be so awesome. So needs analysis, here we go. Donna, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very desirable and 1 being not so desirable at all, what one thing would need to happen to make the sale of your property a real 10?
Well, I'd love to get top dollar for my property.
Top dollar, understood. And Donna, could you do me a favor and quantify top dollar for me?
Well, I know my neighbor got like 650, and I'm hoping that we'll get at least that.
Okay. And so in your mind, top dollar for the property is that 650 number?
Yes.
Got it. And would you do me a favor? Tell me, why is top dollar, why is that 650 number important to you?
Well, we're not downsizing. We're actually upsizing. So I need every dollar that I can get to make that happen.
Understood. Okay. So it sounds to me like the 650 is important to you from the perspective of utilizing that to purchase your next property.
Yeah, for sure.
Got it. All righty. And so I appreciate you sharing that with me, Donna. If you could add just one more thing, a second item that would really make your experience like a 10 plus, what would that second thing be?
I'd like to have some notice before the house is shown.
Got it. Notice. And would you do me a favor? Could you quantify that for me? What kind of notice are we speaking of?
Well, have the dog. So 2 hours before would be great, just so I can have everything, pristine and presentable.
Understood. And tell me, why is that important to have that 2 hour window?
Well, so I can get everybody loaded up and get out of here, maybe run the vacuum around, make it look like it's like we want it to look, because we want to get top dollar. And I don't want them to be impacted by me having dogs here.
Understood. Thank you very much. And if we could add just one more thing, a third thing that would really just send this transaction like over the moon for you, what would that be?
Be great if we could have an offer like for the end of the month.
So before the end of the month. So today is the 6th. So in the next 3 weeks or so?
Yeah.
Okay. And why would an offer in the next 3 weeks be important to you?
I'd like to be in the next house, before all of the summer's gone, definitely before the winter.
Okay, so you're looking to maximize where you're headed for at least a portion of the summer.
Exactly.
Understood. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking time to share those things with me. Now I'm gonna ask you maybe what might sound like an unfair question. Of those three things, getting top dollar at $650,000, the 2-hour notice, or an offer within the next 3 weeks, if you could only have one of those three, which would it be?
That's tough. Probably, I know it's going to sound crazy, but the 2 hours.
So 2-hour notice, understood, okay. And so if we could make sure that you had 2-hour notice every single time,
Yeah.
and you perhaps were looking at 645 or an offer in 4 weeks, you could live with some of the other things being close, but maybe not right dead on, as long as we got that 2-hour notice thing correct, yes?
Yeah, that's kind of it. I just think if I can get the house looking exactly the way it's supposed to look, I think the rest is going to fall into place.
Got it. So let me ask this. If we all of a sudden allowed just one more, you could choose two instead of the one. If the one was the 2 hours, which falls into second place for you?
Getting the offer as soon as possible so we can be done with
Okay.
all of it.
Got it. So notice first, time second, and then money as the third priority. Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. So again, what you've just described to me is massively helpful, and will allow you and I to kind of work in partnership to make sure that we are approaching things from the perspective of what's most important to you. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great, because that was my biggest concern.
Got it. I'm curious, Donna, who in the last couple of days has consulted you in this manner on your specific needs?
I was just sitting here thinking that nobody has asked me that. And that's my biggest concern, is making sure the house looks perfect.
Got it.
That was
Well,
great.
you know what? The simple reality is your concerns are my concerns. So I look forward to continue to push forward in partnership and get this job done for you. All right. So if there's nothing else, I would like to begin to discuss the current state of the real estate market with you. Would that be all right?
Yeah, sure. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, guys. So there's an example of a kind of quick down and dirty needs analysis. Speaking of those dogs,
There are the dogs.
what are your thoughts? Do you see why it's so important? Do you see that the idea of that needs analysis is to just make sure you're on the same page as the seller? Do you see that not every seller prioritizes money over other things? And I will tell you that my biggest aha as a listing agent, by going through that process with people, was exactly that. I had convinced myself that all sellers think one way, and that is, how can I get the most money for my property? And my biggest aha by having these kind of consultative needs analyses with seller after seller after seller was that, that's only true maybe 50% of the time. There's a large portion of the sellers that we work with whose main priority isn't money. It's time, or it's notice, or it's something different. I've already consulted sellers who went through their 1, 2, and 3, and money was not 1, 2, or 3. Right? Fascinating. Imagine if you make the assumption that, or if I made the assumption as Donna's listing agent, that the only thing that was important to her was how much money she made, and did not take the time to make sure that notice was given the way Donna requested it be given? Because she said it, but I didn't actually have a conversation with her around it. In my head, I'm assuming that the money is important and all the rest of it is kind of secondary. In Donna's case, notice is her path to that money. Notice is her path to a fast offer at full price or whatever, right? And so do you see how really what I've done by asking those questions is I've just said, hey, Donna, can you tell me who I need to show up as in order for you and I to leave here tonight as partners in business? That's pretty much what I asked. And she told me. She told me, care about notice because I care about it. She told me, care about how quickly we get an offer because I care about it. And she told me, I'd like this much money. And she told me why it's important to her. Now I have so many more tools and, by the way, some ammunition, because if we get into our next conversation where we're getting into the money part of all of this, we get there and Donna starts to go sideways on me, right? Maybe her 650 house is really worth 575. Maybe that's a conversation we have to have. Or maybe her house really is a 650 house, but in the course of the conversation and looking at comps, she gets all kind of funky and decides she wants to put it on for 725. Do you see how knowing that the second priority for her is an offer in 3 weeks because she wants to be certain that she's able to enjoy her next property for at least a portion of the summer? I get to bring that to the table and help troubleshoot that. You know, Donna, earlier when we spoke, you mentioned that you wanted to be in your new home, certainly with enough of the summer to enjoy where you were headed. I'm curious, based on the data that we've just reviewed and the number you just put on the table, do you think that that number accomplishes getting an offer within the first 3 weeks? Or is that more of a number for like a 90-day offer? I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Right? You get to then have that consult and have that conversation without knowing that Donna needed to go someplace within 3 weeks and why. Now, again, if you remember what I said is some of this overlaps with your conversation when you were qualifying people, right? Because when you're qualifying someone for an appointment, you're asking some of these motivation questions as well. Regardless of what you did back then, you're going to do it again now, because now is when Donna's making a decision to hire you, not when you qualified her 3 days ago. And so we want to make sure that we're bringing all that important stuff back to the table so that when I show up and just show Donna that those things are important to me as well, we're sitting right next to each other, right? We're not across the table from each other anymore. We're not adversaries. We are partners, baby. Make some room, scooch over. I'm coming in. Right? You see how that works? Guys, it's a really powerful tool. We wouldn't spend the time on it that we do if I didn't really trust it, didn't really believe and trust in the fact that this is a powerful tool to help you create more of a bond with that potential seller. Do you remember yesterday or the day before when I was talking about the difference in personality, the difference in behavioral styles, right? Those of you who are those I's and S's, those of you who are more naturally people persons, there we go. Those of you who are more naturally people, this almost comes like second nature to you. Maybe not the specificity of the questions, but understanding more about what's motivating people's decisions and asking questions around it may be more natural for you to ask. For those of you who are more task-oriented, something like this could feel a little torturous without practice, right? Especially the question, why is that so important to you? Right? I can tell you that without practice, that question itself kind of sticks in my throat. right? Because in my fast-paced brain, I'm thinking to myself, who gives a crap why it's important, right? Let's just move forward. Except you kind of have to give a crap about why it's important if you're looking to create that partnership and that bond that allows you in about 15 minutes to ask the question, hey, are there any other questions before we sign the contract and get started, right? That allow you to close. I'm not saying be insincere. That's not my point. My point is some of you will feel differently about this process than others of you. And it has everything to do with who you are naturally. Doesn't make you right and doesn't make you wrong. All it means is some of you may have to practice this differently than others of you. Because for some of you, this is more of a natural conversation. And for some of you, it's a less natural conversation. For all of us, it's an important step in the process. P.S. Did you notice one other thing that I was doing while Donna was answering questions? I was writing down all of her answers. There's a reason for that. From a script perspective, you want to be certain that you are sending the message that these things are important enough. I am paying close enough attention and writing them down because you're telling me that they're massively important to you. From the other perspective, I will tell you at 51, I couldn't be certain that I'd remember what Donna's number 1 was by the time I was at number 3. So I write them down to make sure that I have them correct, right? So maybe for some of you at 31, it's a little different, although I do encourage you to write them down because you send a different message when you write them down. Plus, if something distracts you and then you're missing that number 1, you kind of sound like a dope when you can't repeat them, right? So take that time to write them down and make sure that you're sending the right message. All right, we ready to move on? 33 minutes. Let's keep plowing ahead. We're getting to market conditions. The next page in your script is designed as an example. Do you remember earlier this week I said to you, we'll give you some examples of how to memorize some of this faster. Well, the next page in your script, which should have 7 questions on it with some lines underneath, is an example of how you can take some of these scripts and turn them into forms. We gave you that example with this particular script. We used to hand this out with just the questions in one big paragraph. And then we changed it to model for you how you can actually have most of this. You can have your listing clipboard and literally be going page by page, working through the scripts because they're written on your document with lines underneath so that when someone gives you an answer, you can note those answers down. If you don't know the scripts well enough to not utilize some sort of a cheat sheet, well then use a cheat sheet. Just make it look like you have forms ready to fill out. Trust me, no one's going to look over at your clipboard and say, so wait a minute, are you cheating? Are you reading that? How dare you don't have every word of this memorized? No one's going to do that. Instead, they're going to look at you working diligently from your clipboard thinking, wow, how organized this person is. Wow, how thorough this person is. Wow, how important the things that I say are to this particular professional because they're writing everything I say down. That's the message you send. And the good news is you now don't miss a beat. I'll tell you what, I got called out on it one time. And it wasn't really being called out. Somebody just asked the question. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, the horror. It was more along the lines of, hey, I noticed that you work from that clipboard. Do you work from that clipboard all the time? And I said, you know what, that's a great question. And the answer is, I absolutely do. Because this conversation with you is massively important to me. And I always want to be certain that I've heard every word that you've said and get it right. right? So even if somebody points at it and says, again, you don't have to run screaming from the room. Here's a tidbit of advice. I can't quite think of a time where running screaming from the room is the right answer. Though I did do it one time. I was meeting with a buyer. It's all Debbie Orr's fault because she did not prepare me for what this buyer was going through. She trotted off to her son's wedding, or maybe it was his graduation from Annapolis. I don't remember where you were. And she stuck me with this buyer who was in the middle of a terrible divorce and forgot to mention to me that she was in the middle of a terrible divorce. And I sat down across from the buyer and said, "Hi, it's so lovely to meet you. I'm curious, what's motivating you to be a buyer right now?" Well, of course, it was because like her and her husband were, and she burst into tears, like sobbing, like sucking her lip in and out tears. I think I was 12 years old at the time, so I didn't really know what to do. And so I excused myself and I left the room. And I went upstairs and I said to somebody upstairs, okay, so here's what's happening. What is it? What do I do? And they said, well, the first thing you do is you don't leave. Get back in there, you. And so I said, oh, okay. And I started to go back downstairs to get in the back. And they said, wait, come here, come here. Take these. And they handed me tissues. And so I walked back in and said, pop the tissues on the, said, I am so, so sorry for asking that question. Because she, through her sobs, said, I'm going through a terrible divorce. Said I was unaware. How is it that I can help? And she got over it and I got over it and we all, right? So I can tell you from experience that running from the room in scenarios that make you uncomfortable is not the right thing to do. Just in case any of you were unclear about that, I told you I would tell you all the stupid things that I have done in my career. That was probably right up there, right? And we survived. I sold her a house. And by the way, Debbie has gone on to sell her, I think, 15 other properties because she's constantly moving. So it couldn't have been that bad. So let's do this. Let's run through this market conditions brain dump script, which is what I call it. These 7 questions ultimately help the seller do a little bit of a brain dump before you get into the numbers. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask somebody to be the agent and read these questions, and I will be your seller and just give you some answers. But I want you to hear the through line of how these questions work. So somebody go ahead and unmute and give us these 7 questions, if you would. Remember, we just asked permission after the needs analysis to move to a market conditions conversation, right? Those are permission-based transition scripts, if you want the technical term for those at the bottom of each page. So that permission-based transition script was, thank you for that. If it's all right with you, I'd like to have some conversation now around market conditions and how they affect your home. They say, yes, great, right? Those transition scripts are important because they make sure that the seller is coming with you, right, on the ride, that you're just not moving forward and they're stuck thinking about something else. That's why you get permission to move to the next one. All right, so I've now talked for another minute and a half and nobody has unmuted. So I'm going to assume, there we go. Thank you, Alex, I appreciate it. Go for it.
Okay, so Mr. Seller, before we get into the facts that I've prepared for you to review, I'm curious to know, what is it that you've heard or seen recently about the housing and financial market?
Well, so what I have heard and seen is that both are kind of going like gangbusters.
Understood. Can you talk a little bit about that? What specifically have you heard?
Well, I've heard that the financial markets from like a stock market perspective, that just kind of keeps going up. I don't personally invest there, but I've heard from friends that, you know, the stock market just keeps going up and up and up. And I've also heard that certainly in the last few months, the housing market is like totally crazy. So that's kind of what I've heard.
So I'm curious, is that information that you're talking about more national in scope or more local?
Good question. Well, the stock market news, I guess, is just kind of national. That's just from like reading the headlines on CNN. But the real estate news was more local. I've heard that from neighbors. I've heard that from some friends at the club, and so that's kind of more local. That's more specific to kind of where we're living.
Got it. And how do you believe that these realities might affect you and your property?
Well, what I'm hoping for is that if things are going gangbusters, that the gangbusters come right to my front door. I'd like to benefit the way I hear that some other people are benefiting by being a seller today.
Hallelujah.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the current market conditions before we press ahead?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. I think I'm set.
Great, perfect. So, and do you have any other specific questions about the market that I can answer so that we can be sure we cover them?
No, oh, you know what, Alex, before I do want to just mention one thing, because one of the things that was mentioned to me that kind of got me thinking through this whole, maybe we should put the house on the market now thing, is one of my neighbors who did sell. They sold kind of, I don't know what you call it, like off market, like, so that I'm not sure that it's noted any place. And so I just want to make sure that you're aware of that particular sale, because I believe the house to be pretty comparable. And so there is that sale right around the corner at, number 123 that I think is relevant to our discussions.
Great, yes, thank you so much for pointing that out.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Alex, for that. What did you notice with those questions? A couple of things I want to make sure that you heard. What'd you notice?
So you're really taking the temperature of what they know and whether it is applicable to.
Yeah,
what-
100%.
Oh, sorry, maybe I shouldn't have answered.
No, you have just as much, you have more right than anybody to answer, because you were the brilliant agent on it. What'd you notice
Well,
about that? Go ahead, Stuart.
Rick, it's all about the questions too. You don't want to put in your own piece of mind. You just want to hear what the client has to say.
Yeah, that's a brilliant acknowledgement, right? It has nothing to do, and if you listened, Alex was really quite good at not giving her opinion, right? I loved the hallelujah because it lightened it up, right? Don't be afraid to kind of throw those kinds of things in. But it was interesting when I talked about the for sale by owner around the corner, Alex didn't take that and then start giving a dissertation about that property or knowing about it or not knowing about it or talking about whether it was included in the comps. Or she just heard the information, said thank you, and moved forward. And Stuart's point is exactly what Alex did, is that these are questions that are designed to help the seller do a brain dump. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with whether the answers are right or wrong or someplace in between. You're just looking to take the pulse of where the seller is at so that you can then utilize that information later on.
Can I
Yes.
just make a quick note off of that? Before I came to KW, I would have taken that bait and bid it and run with it. So I've learned one thing. If I've
Well,
learned it.
I think the list of things you've learned is quite lengthy. However, one of them is that, and I appreciate you saying that, because you know what? Me too, right? And it's the reason we stop and point these things out is just that, because so many of us sometimes fall victim to taking the bait, right? And then all of a sudden we're distracted and we're talking about things over here that the seller thinks might be important that we know are not quite as relevant, or we're pulled into that conversation too early. We haven't gone through the process to get to that in the right time or with the right expectation set before we get there. So it's really important to just kind of understand this is another opportunity for you to ask, listen, validate, and move forward. I want you to notice how the first question is written before we get into the facts that I have prepared for you to review, right? That word facts is there for a reason. These aren't opinions, they're facts. This isn't me just putting my finger up in the air and saying, here's what makes sense. These are the facts about what drives our market. It's important to know where they heard the news, national or local, right? Because sometimes they hear things because their sister lives in Boston and Boston is moving crazy. And I use that as an example because pre-pandemic in most of Fairfield County, we were not seeing what places like Boston or Austin, Texas, or other cities in the country were seeing. And so if the seller was talking through how the market was going like gangbusters, instead of saying, well, that's not really what we're experiencing here, which makes them wrong, by the way, we ask another question. I'm curious, where did you hear that information? Was it more national or local in scope? And it has them think it through. You know what? Great question. My sister was telling me about that. And so therefore it was kind of more Boston related, maybe not quite as local to here. My hope is that we can talk about here more than Boston. Absolutely. And then let's move to it. Right? So you see, it helps them kind of figure out what they know and why they know it and why they think what they know is important. I've asked these questions and heard people say things like, the market's moving crazy fast. I hope that I can benefit from that. And it was. And so we knew we were headed. I've also had people answer those questions where the market wasn't moving fast. And so then I knew we might have a slightly different conversation coming up because their expectations were here and the market was someplace different. I've also had the reverse where they've said, oh, I know it's a terrible time to be a seller. I have no choice, right? I'm really interested in taking this new job down in Atlanta. And so, I'm just going to have to suck it up here. I've had people say things like that and be accurate. So then I knew where we were headed. But I've also had people say that and recognize that, you know what, things aren't quite as doomy and gloomy as they just described. They may actually be pretty surprised with where we're going and the conversation we've had. Here's my point. Do you see a benefit in predetermining, at least at some basic level, how the seller might respond to the news that you're about to help them interpret by getting the book on them right up front before you even get there? Say yes, because it is a benefit. All righty. Let's keep going. Market conditions. We now have just 2 opportunities to talk about the macro version of the market conditions. And when I say the macro version, what I mean is we're not quite to the comps yet. We're not quite to micro, which is them and their comps. We're still on the macro, which is kind of the town and maybe some price points within the town. And there are 2 scripts that you have. One of them goes along with the Broker Metrics supply and demand graph. I will pop that on the screen for you so that you know what that looks like. The Broker Metrics supply and demand graph is viewable. Hold on a second, I'm struggling to find it. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Here, it's obtainable through Broker Metrics. Broker Metrics is available only from inside of each of our office locations because it is a broker tool that we've opened up to you. So it's nothing that we can actually have you download on your own personal computers. And so if you're not in one of our locations and you need one of these, you can always sort of call or email into the staff and we'll be happy to kind of log in and email them off to you. But this is what the Broker Metrics supply and demand graph looks like. Ultimately, I want you to just kind of take a look at what's on the screen. I will read the Broker Metrics pricing script to you, which will explain to you what you're looking at, and then I'll ask for any questions. So you guys watch the screen. I'm going to read the script, and this is graph number one of finishing up market conditions, macro market conditions, before we get to the micro. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this snapshot of the current market shows a few things. The red lines represent homes that are on the market and available. The blue lines represent homes that are currently under agreement, and the green lines represent homes that have actually sold and closed. I'm sure you can see how simple it would be to place you on the red line. However, far more difficult to place you on the blue or green lines, as they represent a much smaller target. Do you agree? You do want to be on the blue or green lines, don't you? That's the whole script. And the whole idea of this script and this chart is not to spend 20 minutes coming up with some dissertation on it, right? That's not the point here. The point is, I'm going to stop the share, and if you have questions, I'll go back to it. The point there is kind of multifold. The first reason we use it is because, and I'm not kidding, it's got a lot of pretty colors on it. And oftentimes we're to a point now in the consultation where there hasn't been a whole lot to look at, and people are attracted to the pretty colors. And you want to make sure that what you put on the table kind of draws people in. The second thing that we're putting that on the table for is the simple idea that there's big lines and small lines. And those red lines, any number gets you on the red line, because that's just a home that's on the MLS. However, we want to help them understand that not every single home sells. Even in today's market, not every single home sells. And so if there's this many homes on the market and this many that are actually under agreement and closed, they have to visually now shrink their opportunity down to fit the specificity of the target of the blue or green lines, right? It kind of takes them from here to here. So it's a focusing tool for them. It also shows seasonality, right? Because you can see that the listings go up in the spring and summer and then down in the winter. So there's a couple of other things that might be valid on this graph. But do me a favor, don't get sucked into all the numbers that drive this. The reason we show it is to show them there's lots of homes on the market and only a portion of them sell. Regardless of what's happening in the market, not every home sells. That's the point of this graph. Questions, comments, concerns on it?
Yeah, Rick, hey.
Yes.
There's a few versions of a pre-listing packet, and I've noticed that I've had to brush up on several of the packages. I changed them into PowerPoint, and I added pages, and but some of the ones that are existing, I think just for new agents, just the readability of them are really difficult, like the light gray fonts and the small type. I mean, I've actually tried to up the type font, and I just don't know what direction we could advise the younger people, because they're not, or the newer people, I should say. I'm not younger. What direction should they go in? Because I also got another presentation from some company that we hired a few years ago that was very contemporary. And I'm just trying to clear out what it is, what should we be using as the master?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think you need to decide what works the best for you. That the answer is going to be different for everybody. And do me a favor, Dan, hold that question till the end. I'll come back to that when we finish, but I want to stay focused on these market conditions because I do want to get to the SPA before we run out of time. So any questions on the brokermetric supply and demand graph specifically? Okay, so with that, if you turn the page, the next 2 pages are the second graph that we're going to work from. And what I gave you is just an example. I mean, you can tailor this to whatever it is you choose in terms of month supply of inventory or absorption rate. This is just one that kind of worked for me. And so what you see here is just an example of absorption rates, which is, again, month supply of inventory in Woodbury for a specific moment in time. The script that goes with this says, this chart outlines the month supply of inventory for Woodbury, as well as for different price brackets inside of Woodbury. I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, can you see how the market varies from price point to price point? Right, the velocity of the market varies from price point to price point. Based on this information, which range do you feel is moving fastest? And I'll ask that of all of you. Which range, if you look at this chart in Woodbury, is moving the fastest?
$250 to $400.
That's exactly right. And which would you say is moving the slowest?
The 700 plus. No. Well, I think the 401. I don't know what.
Yeah, the 401 to 550, I would agree with that, Karen, right? 41 months to absorb all of the inventory. So that's moving even slower than the high end. And so I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what do you think this information tells us about how precise we need to be when choosing the positioning of your home? Guys, that's ultimately the $1 million question, right? The only reason we put these numbers in front of them is to engage them so that they can see what's going on, right? Month supply of inventory talks about the pace and the velocity of the market. There are pockets that move faster and move slower. I'll tell you that we utilized this specific chart back in the summer of 2017 to help a seller in Woodbury move from being priced at $439 to being priced at $395. Because just the simple review of the pace of the market and their urgency to get the home sold was pretty clear to them when I asked the question, which price category is your home currently in? Well, it's in this one. Yes, and what's the pace of the market there? Well, it's very slow, 41 months. Yeah, it's almost 4 years. I'm curious, what if you're the last one to sell? Are you willing to still be on the market almost 4 years from now before you attract a buyer? Well, no, that's not what we want. Understood. I'm curious, which pricing category is moving faster than the one that you're currently in? Well, the answer, of course, 250 to 4. Yeah, so what adjustment do you think you might be able to make to kind of move yourself into a pricing category that's moving at a pace that makes sense for you and the urgency that you have with the sale of your home? She wasn't very quick to jump at that question, by the way. But do you see how you can utilize this kind of data with questions to help guide people to making good decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Right? She eventually got to that place of, yeah, you know what? We don't want to be on the market for 3.5 years. We barely want to be on the market for 7.5 months. But clearly, that price range is moving 4 times as fast, 5 times as fast as the one that we're in. So minimally, regardless of anything else, regardless of comps, again, this is still macro. We haven't gotten to micro. Regardless of anything else, we know we need to be in that range in order to take advantage of the pace and the velocity of that segment. Do you see how that's a different conversation than here are the 3 solds that best match your house? Right? We're going to get there because that gives us data as well. But we've got to set the stage with some of these macro conversations, the brain dump, then these 2 charts to just kind of help them understand that as we move into the micro conversation with your house, we've got to be precise, which is why I'll go back to, what do you think this information tells us about how precise we need to be when choosing the positioning of your home? Right? And you just have to kind of guide them to that answer. I'll give you another technique. This works really well. When you ask a kind of an open-ended question like that, you run the risk of having the seller give you the wrong answer. Right? Or maybe they don't give you the wrong answer, they just kind of give you a weird answer. Right? No one's going to say to you, well, all of that tells me that we don't have to be precise at all. That's not what someone's going to say. But they might say, well, it sounds like we have to at least look at the comps before we can make, any kind of decision. And, my neighbor, she sold really quickly for above asking, and we'd really like that. Well, that doesn't answer the question at all. However, let me give you this technique. If Karen said that answer to me, I would say, you know what, I understand 100%. Karen, it sounds to me, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth or paraphrase what you've just said, but it kind of sounds to me like what you're saying is this data kind of tells us we need to be pretty precise when we choose the positioning of your home. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Great. Right? We kind of preface it by saying, look, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's exactly what we then go ahead and do, is put words in her mouth, right? And I find that technique works really well, not to manipulate anybody or it doesn't work in a negative way. It works to help people get clarity around what I was really asking. Remember, everybody wants to look good and be right. And so that technique kind of helps them get back on track to say, oh, yes, that's exactly what I meant. Precision, that's where I was going. Because maybe they just didn't understand the question. Maybe they understood and they didn't want to give the answer that they kind of thought was right because they didn't want to lock themselves into having to be precise. But I'm going to challenge that a little bit and then paraphrase what I think I heard them say with what the right answer really is. Do you see how that works from a technique perspective? I encourage you to utilize it. It's a good one.
So no matter what they say in that regard, you just bring it back to the script answer.
Yeah. I hate to keep using this word because it's a little bit overused at this point, but it is just another pivot.
Right.
You ask the question, you hear the answer, and then to confirm that answer is the right answer, you may have to add a couple of words into their answer to get them to the precision piece. But you're just going to kind of bend and pivot off of what they've said to say, so what I'm hearing you say is we need to really focus on being as precise as possible so as not to miss the mark here. Yeah, I could not agree more. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, guys. I don't know where our 2 hours goes. Holy Christmas. So we still haven't even hit the SPA, but that's okay. So we're going to start on Tuesday, right? Is today Wednesday or Thursday? Today's Thursday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're done for the week. So next Tuesday, we will start with the SPA. We will spend fully 45 minutes or so on pricing, answer some questions about objection handling, and then move into the anatomy of the seller transaction. I want to ask you guys a question, and I'll take the answer on Tuesday. We don't have to have it now. Thursday is Red Day. And so most of us are going to be doing some version of Red Day all on Thursday, right? which means doing whatever project you choose, right? The offices are closed, right? We take the day off to give back to the community. And so therefore, we may not be done with every project by 4. I'm okay with not having a session on Thursday. We will need it, however. We'll certainly need Thursday because I can't do buyers in one day. We'll at least need Wednesday for buyers and then at least one more day.
Mhm.
Are you okay pushing that Thursday to the following Tuesday? So think that through and we'll kind of take a vote on Tuesday. I'm all for not working on Red Day for Ignite and then pushing that to the following Tuesday, whatever that day, the 18th, maybe it might be. I don't remember what it is, but take a look at it.
Rick, is that our last day?
If I can get through buyers, it was supposed to be our last day on Red Day, right, on the 13th. But we're a little bit behind, which is not uncommon. Buyers does go faster because the scripts, we spend a slightly less concentrated amount of time because they're very similar to the seller scripts, so we get to move through them faster. However, I'll need at least 2 solid sessions for buyers, if not 3. So we may find ourselves pushing into that following week anyway. I didn't promise. I gave you a schedule and didn't say that we could extend. I'm now saying that we're going to need to. So my vote would be, let's not do next Thursday and do Tuesday and maybe even Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week, and then we can be done. Let's figure that out and take a vote when we come back on Tuesday. Until then, have a lovely evening and after, and is it evening? Yeah, I guess it is evening. And Diane, if you want to stay on, and if anyone wants to stay on so we can answer Diane's question, I'll be happy to answer that